I wandered into the woods, stumbled upon a dark ritual, watched a man sacrifice to a fire, then ran for my life. Thursday, February 6, 2025, I am composing this on my computer. It is foggy outside, and honestly, I have had a thought weighing on my mind since I was a young boy back in 1977. The story I am about to share has genuinely troubled me for decades, and I am seeking advice to help move past it. I am 67 years old, and my son encouraged me to come here and ask you all for guidance. Before I proceed, I want to mention that I have attended therapy thanks to my son's wife convincing me to do so. I am also on medication for sleep, but it hardly helps. I am not seeking questions but rather simple advice if anyone has any to offer. The narrative may be quite lengthy, so I don't anticipate a large number of responses, but for those who do, I sincerely appreciate your assistance. The year was 1977. I had recently turned 19 years old and was employed at a grocery store in Seattle called Piggly Wiggly. I recall my mindset at that time. I was young and carefree. I had long hair, trying to emulate my favorite band members. I was dating a girl and had just finished writing a Christmas card when my boss called me into the office. I cannot remember his name, but he was younger and scruffy, likely dealing with a rough divorce. He would often drink and stare at the security cameras, which were quite expensive and barely afford the operational costs due to the high expenses involved in preventing theft. He informed me that I needed to head to a different location if I was comfortable, as they did not have anyone closer. I inquired about the duration of my stay, and he said I could leave by 12. So I clocked out and hopped into my car, an old Volkswagen Beetle that belonged to my mother. If I had known its future value, I would have kept it. I drove for about an hour and a half, maybe more. I honestly can't recall. The entire journey, I questioned my decision. It was cold, and the Beetle had no heat. After driving for over an hour, I wondered if I would even have the energy to return home. Upon arriving, the place was deserted. There were only 2 cars in the parking lot. I got out, smoked a cigarette, and headed inside. I remember it being very small, only 2 offices at most, and it was cramped with shelves. Despite that, it felt nice, so I walked to the back. I encountered a man in a black button-up shirt who introduced himself as the manager. He appeared to be around my age but had no hair. He informed me that he had to leave and gave me some instructions. After watching him drive away, I sat at the register fidgeting with a stapler or something similar. It was then that 3 men approached and placed lighter fluid, some wooden planks, and a tarp on the register. The register was different from the one at my location, and it took me a while to figure it out. They asked me, "How long are you here, buddy?" I remember it vividly. They all looked middle-aged, and I shot them a dirty look. They laughed and made fun of me, saying they couldn't imagine working there at that time of night, calling it a sissy job. I rang them up and they left. I continued to mess around and even slipped a few cigarette boxes into the pocket of my leather coat. After some time, I closed the store and stepped outside to smoke. I recall the smell of smoke, which made me wonder why my cigarettes smelled so terrible. Eventually, I realized it wasn't my cigarettes at all. I looked up and saw smoke billowing from behind the store. My curiosity piqued, and at that moment, I didn't care to investigate. It was the winter of '77, and there was nothing else to do. You had to experience that era to truly comprehend genuine boredom. I audibly exclaimed, "Forget this," and tossed my cigarettes aside. I walked toward the back and noticed the smoke trailing into the woods for quite a distance. I hesitated again, staring into the dark woods enveloping the store. I went to my car, retrieved the flashlight from behind the front seat, and noticed it had little charge left from the camping trips my friends and I had taken. It was cold to the touch, but I regretted every moment leading up to this decision. I began walking into the woods while pulling out the marijuana I had in my pocket. At that time, my father had left and was with his new wife. My mother was an alcoholic who would sleep with anyone, sometimes even women, which, during this period, was considered quite unusual. So I took this as an opportunity to smoke. I wandered through the woods, following the source of the smoke as I lit up. I kept stepping over branches until I could no longer see the store. Finally, I reached a point where I could see the origin of the smoke. Through the trees, I noticed an enormous fire, much larger than a bonfire. Initially, I felt exhilarated, but as I got closer, something seemed off. The people gathered around the fire were sitting in an odd arrangement, almost like the way you lean back in preschool. It felt strange. They were seated with their hands in their laps, completely still, fixated on the flames. I sat there, questioning what I was witnessing, and ultimately thought it might be wise to lie low and not be out in the open. So I did just that. I stared at the scene until they all stood up and turned to face the woods in the direction opposite mine. Then I heard screaming. I remember a man in a hood reminiscent of those historical executioners dragging someone bound. I couldn't clearly see what was happening nor remember it in vivid detail. All I recollect is that they unmistakably slid something across the person's throat and tossed him into the bonfire. At that moment, I had had enough. I sprang to my feet and bolted out of the woods, literally ran. I even left my flashlight behind. I rushed to my car and got in. It took a moment for the engine to start, and then I sped away at an incredible speed. As I drove, I was consumed with anxiety. I felt as though every car was tailing me, and in every moment, I feared someone would pounce on me or follow me home. Upon returning home, I greeted my mother, who was on the couch eating ice cream. She remarked that I looked dirty and disheveled, then asked why I was home so late. I told her it had been a hectic day and went straight to bed. I never mentioned it to her, and that remained true until the day she passed away. I never confided in my father or friends either. I stayed silent about it. For days, it consumed my thoughts, but I drank to drown them out. Even intimate moments with my then-girlfriend couldn't alleviate my fear. I was genuinely frightened. I sat and drank, contemplating whether to approach the police or return to uncover the truth. But after 6 months had passed, I found myself unable to move on. Years have gone by, yet I still think about it frequently. I remember vividly at 34, when it became a distant memory, burning in my mind, pressing for revelation. I took a trip back to my hometown with my wife and 2 children. At that time, my 2 sons were 9 and 11. We drove there in my truck, and I recall my wife, Marigold, urging me to share stories about my childhood as we made our way. I told them it was beautiful, but much had changed. The children were excited, as was I. As I shared tales, the memory of that night in the woods resurfaced. The true fear I had experienced came rushing back. I remember my wife in the passenger seat asking why I looked so worried. I assured her that I was fine and there was nothing to fret about. Eventually, we arrived, and we set up our tents by a lovely riverside, most likely near Lake Union. Later, I decided to take a walk with just the kids while my wife chatted with other campers. As night fell, I recounted the story, albeit in a more child-friendly manner. I told them I had barely escaped from the peculiar cultists, adding an adventurous twist. They enjoyed it, though they appeared quite scared. Naturally, they shared their own scary stories, and I pretended to be frightened. For some reason, later in the trip, I felt compelled to find that store once more. I concocted an excuse to head in the direction of the location where all of this transpired. I was foolish. My wife hesitated but eventually relented, driven by her craving for coffee or something similar. I ended up driving there to make a pit stop for snacks. I parked in the exact spot where I had left my Beetle all those years ago. I asked my kids and wife to wait in the truck while I headed inside. The store looked almost identical to how I remembered it. The only changes were in the products, as decades had passed and brands revised their logos. Regrettably, it was no longer a Piggly Wiggly, but it retained a nostalgic charm. I purchased my wife's coffee and some candy for the kids, then walked back to the truck to give them their snacks. Just as I was about to start the engine, I knew I needed to return to those woods for my own peace of mind. So I told them, "Hey, I saw a deer," and raced out of the truck to grab my gun. My son opened the door and followed me, while my other son and wife remained behind. I glanced back and told him to stay in the truck, but it was clear that the only way to keep him there would require the truth, which I had never told my wife or anyone else. So we ventured into the woods together, navigating through the underbrush. The forest was just that, a forest. I wasn't sure where I was headed, so I forged ahead, taking turns I vaguely remembered. My son asked where the deer was, and if we could go back, and I bluntly told him to be quiet. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally spotted it, the clearing. A wave of guilt and fear washed over me the moment I recognized where I stood. I was terrified but continued forward, knowing I would regret this later. I paused in the same spot where I had been all those years ago and took a deep breath, pushing onward. I walked down, and what I found only intensified my dread. I saw a vast fire pit that appeared recently used, still covered in ash. That's right, it was still ashy, as if a fire had been lit just days earlier. I kept moving around it, spotting remnants of burned wood, books, and papers. Thankfully, there were no bodies, nothing like what I had been searching for. I wondered if perhaps I had misinterpreted the significance of the place. If this had been a sacrificial pit, wouldn't there still be remains? After a moment of reflection, I decided to head back to the truck, regretting that I had entered the woods in the first place. I found my wife sitting in the back seat of my truck, cradling one of my sons while a man in a black denim jacket and slacks knocked on the window, trying to get their attention. I called him over. While I don't specifically recall how the conversation unfolded, I ended up yelling at him to leave while he warned me to stay away. I asked him who he thought he was and shoved him against the truck, slamming him into the fender. I was quite fiery back then. I miss those days. He told me that I was asking for trouble, and if I were a man, I would get in the truck and leave. I shoved him away, jumped into my vehicle, and drove off. Though, at the time, these events seemed unrelated, as time passed, I often wondered if what had occurred was something more nefarious. I confided in my wife eventually. I would later share this with my children during a sleepless night. My daughter-in-law, Ashley, suggested therapy. At first, the idea didn't appeal to me, but I eventually gathered the courage and went. I was prescribed medications to help with sleep, but remained restless nonetheless. I still ponder what truly happened that night, attempting to lead a regular life. That incident took place over 40 years ago, and I still remember every detail: the shoppers, the man at my truck, the fire. Are all these events linked, or was the man by my truck merely a robber, worse, posing a threat to my family? Perhaps the shoppers were completely unrelated to the fire, and what I witnessed was not what I believed. To this day, I remain uncertain. This has tormented my mind for years. I often wish I had said something, reported it to the authorities, or horribly stayed to observe more to achieve some understanding. If any of you wish to share your thoughts, I will log on to check. I appreciate those of you who took the time to read this. I just needed a space to express myself rather than talk to someone who is simply paid to listen. Thank you. Story 2. After 2 years of my best friend suffering with a terrible boyfriend, she celebrated her birthday alone, crying with a cake she bought for herself. Hello, everyone. This is not about my own relationship, but rather about my best friend's partnership with her boyfriend. I have known both of them for 2 years, and throughout that time, my best friend has shared her frustrations with me regarding her boyfriend's poor treatment of her. Initially, I got along with him. However, after witnessing the way he has treated her, my feelings towards him have changed significantly. I want to support her, but I worry that I might be encouraging her to endure this situation instead. I feel compelled to voice my concerns to either her, him, or both, yet I fear that doing so could damage our friendships or, worse, lead to losing my best friend. Here are several issues she has mentioned regarding her boyfriend when their relationship officially began. He continued to spend time with and live with his ex-girlfriend in the same home. Whenever my best friend tries to have a serious conversation with her boyfriend, he responds by yelling, leaving the house, insisting he does not want to discuss it, or accusing her of attacking him. Eventually, she stopped bringing up important topics and now allows him to act however he wishes. She confided in me, saying, "I don't want him to yell at me and turn it into an argument, so I'll just stay quiet." Typically, she is quite assertive and does not let others dictate her life. However, her boyfriend's aggressive behavior has silenced her. My best friend has never met her boyfriend's parents or family, even though he has met hers. She believes that for a serious relationship, it is crucial for them to meet each other's families, especially since she envisions marriage and children, and they have been together for over 2 years. She fears he might be concealing something, but is unsure what it could be. He moved in with her and has not contributed rent for, I believe, 7 months. She maintains a notebook to track the rent he owes her and understandably feels resentful. She also pays rent related to her job and has expressed that she is under considerable financial stress, wondering how she will manage rent for both places. Although he holds 4 jobs, none provide substantial income. His earnings are mostly spent on alcohol, food delivery, gym fees, supplements, and pet supplies. Despite not paying rent for this extended period, he refers to their home as his house, not their house. His car is broken, and he drives her vehicle everywhere to various jobs, the gym, the bar, etc. His car was damaged in an accident, making it undrivable. The front is badly damaged, resembling an abandoned vehicle on the roadside. While this situation might not seem too serious, she frequently ends up using Uber for transportation unless I or another friend can provide a ride. She cannot afford the expense of all these Uber rides. Logistically, it makes more sense for him to use her car, yet he has no intention of repairing or replacing his own vehicle. This has been the case for around 4 to 5 months. Throughout their relationship, he has never celebrated her birthday. He has never given her a gift, wished her well, taken her somewhere special, written her a card, or bought her a cake. For her most recent birthday, he chose to go to the gym for 3 hours instead of joining her, me, and another friend for a wine tasting event. We had a wonderful time, but there was a palpable tension. All of us felt upset with him for neglecting to spend her birthday with her. That evening, she returned home alone and realized she had no birthday cake. She went to the store, purchased one, brought it home, lit the candles, sang happy birthday to herself, blew out the candles, and later ended up crying alone. She performed in a live theater production, but he did not attend, despite her having rehearsed for 6 months. She had told him that just his presence would make her happy. She didn't care if her parents or other friends missed it. She informed him of the date and time months in advance, but he notified her an hour before the show that he could not be there. I personally drove her to the theater that day and overheard the phone call. She was in tears and laughing maniacally for an entire hour leading up to her performance. I had never seen her so distressed. It was as if she was having a complete mental breakdown. There have been occasional rumors about him being unfaithful over the past 2 years. I have never received concrete evidence of any such rumors, but there have been a couple of strange incidents, including a girl appearing in public alongside him who claimed to be his girlfriend. My best friend has a nagging suspicion that he is cheating on her, though she lacks solid proof. He reportedly used to be polyamorous, making me wonder if he still desires that lifestyle, even while my best friend seeks a committed relationship without additional partners. On that topic, they once engaged in a threesome with another friend of ours, a 23-year-old female. At the time, this friend was interested in one of his close friends, someone she had previously been intimate with, and it seemed likely they would eventually date. My best friend's boyfriend harbored resentment because she had a threesome when she was 18, whereas he had not. One night, my best friend, her boyfriend, and that other friend were quite drunk. I was present with 2 other friends in the living room that night. My best friend pulled our friend into their bed because she did not want to sleep alone. Allegedly, he initiated the encounter by suggesting they all sleep naked. My best friend felt this was inappropriate, but both girls ultimately disrobed. What began as touching progressed to kissing, and she quickly recognized how things were escalating. She told me she wasn't trying to instigate anything, but believed it would please her boyfriend, so she consented. She made sure to check repeatedly with the other friend if she was comfortable with it. It appears he engaged with their friend first, followed by my best friend. I tried discussing that night with our mutual friend, but she claimed to have no recollection of it or whether she enjoyed it. This friend struggles with asserting herself, even about things she does not want to do, leading me to wonder if my best friend's boyfriend took advantage of her vulnerability. The boyfriend's friend, who had a budding romance with this girl, mentioned this was not the first instance of him acting in such a selfish manner, thus eroding their friendship due to his toxic behavior. This incident raises significant ethical concerns for me, particularly the morals surrounding sex with an inebriated individual who has a connection to someone you consider a close friend. It has compelled me to reevaluate my perspectives on myself, my relationships, alcohol, consent, and other aspects related to intimacy. This burden weighs heavily on my conscience and has driven me to distraction, especially considering how my best friend can recognize this context yet still proceed with it. I even asked her, concerning a girl I might find appealing, whether she would support her boyfriend wanting to engage with her. She firmly stated she would never allow that, yet I struggle to trust her. I certainly cannot trust her boyfriend. I turn to all of you because I find myself faced with 2 options. On one hand, I adhere to my morals and convictions. I speak out and tell my best friend that her boyfriend's behavior is unacceptable and detrimental to her self-esteem and character. She is reluctant to listen to her friends because of her love for him and her desire to fix him, which has resulted in alienation from her other friends who recognize that he does not genuinely value her and is unlikely to change. She would likely dismiss my concerns, and he might even react with anger, potentially damaging our friendship. Nonetheless, I believe my best friend may eventually understand that life is not the same without me and return to me, just as she has done with other friends over the years. Conversely, I could remain silent and pretend everything is all right, despite my true feelings about her boyfriend. This approach would likely lead me to withdraw from both of them and our broader social circle without providing any explanation. However, should they inquire about my absence, I would eventually need to disclose the truth regarding my feelings, as I strive to be an honest person. Therefore, it appears that regardless of my choice, a conversation is necessary. For the sake of my mental well-being, I must honestly express to my best friend how I feel about her boyfriend and how their relationship has impacted me. This is not just from a moral perspective, but also because watching my best friend endure pain, disappointment, and mistreatment for the past 2 years causes me immense hurt. I feel distressed witnessing her cry, and it weighs on me to some extent that by not addressing the situation, I have allowed it to reach this point, even if it seems out of my control. I have discussed this with other friends she has lost, and they share my sentiments, encouraging me to believe that I am justified in speaking out. I welcome any and all feedback, whether it is gentle or frank. Please assist me,